I'm Natalie Warren, 34 years old, and every Christmas I braced myself for the same familiar sting. My mother's polite voice would insist there simply wasn't enough room for me and the children, as if soft words could disguise the rejection. So I stood outside the house I once called home, clutching gift bags with frozen fingers, while Leah tugged at my coat and Benjamin held a stuffed toy meant for Grandma. Through the frosted glass, I saw the table overflowing cousins tearing at wrapping paper, and Melissa's family seated proudly as if the night belonged only to them. Each December, I told myself, maybe this time would be different. But the porch always became our place. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever been left out by those you love, most hit that like and subscribe button so we can share these stories together. I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, the youngest daughter of Carol and Richard Warren. My parents had built their reputation on old-fashioned values of hard work and pride, though kindness in our home often came wrapped in conditions. From the beginning, Melissa was the favored one, praised for her grades, her poise, her steady climb into marriage and comfort. I took a different road. College then, marriage, then the quiet unraveling of that marriage, leaving me with 2 children and the weight of starting over. When I came back to Charleston after the divorce, I thought family would mean support and familiarity. What I found instead was a carefully drawn line between belonging and being tolerated. I rented a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the tiles cracked underfoot and the faucet whined like it had secrets to tell. My children filled the rooms with laughter, but it was clear we weren't living the kind of life my parents celebrated. Melissa visited with expensive handbags and stories of weekends at the coast, while I stretched freelance paychecks to cover groceries. Still, I worked every spare hour, pouring energy into marketing projects at night after tucking the kids into bed. I told myself that effort would eventually carve us a new path, even if no one else believed it. Holidays, though, reminded me how little had changed. At birthdays, barbecues, and Sunday dinners, I was often missing from the guest list, learning afterward through photos or whispered explanations. My mother always smiled when I asked, assuring me I was welcome any time, but the invitations never seemed to appear. For a long time, I convinced myself these slights weren't deliberate, just oversight. Yet standing outside in the cold year after year, watching my children wonder why we were never part of the celebration, I felt the truth settle heavier each time. That last Christmas on the porch, when Leah asked softly why we weren't going inside, something inside me shifted. I didn't answer her question, but I made a promise to myself. No more waiting at doors that would not open. No more teaching my children that love meant standing in the shadows. If my family could not make space for us, then I would find a way to build our own. And as we drove back to that small apartment with the bare corner where a tree should have been, I realized the coming year would be different. The only question was how. Christmas night faded into silence as I drove the children back to our apartment, the headlights cutting across empty streets. Leah hummed in the back seat, maybe, to keep herself from asking more questions, and Benjamin slept with his toy reindeer tucked under his chin. By the time I carried them inside and laid them in their beds, the night's cold had followed me in. I stared at the corner of our living room, where a Christmas tree should have been, and knew this feeling was becoming far too familiar. It wasn't only Christmas. The pattern had been there for years, tucked into birthdays, cookouts, and milestones that slipped past me. I remembered when my mother's retirement party came and went without a call. I saw the photos later, her glowing in front of a banner, while Melissa stood proudly at her side. My name wasn't mentioned, my children not even considered. Another time, it was a backyard barbecue Melissa hosted. She tagged the whole family in a smiling group shot, each face shining in the summer sun. Everyone except me. I told myself these things were oversights, that maybe people had forgotten, that surely it wasn't done with intention. But each time when I tried to bring it up gently, the response was the same, my mother smiling, saying, "You know, you're always welcome, sweetheart." Words that never matched the reality. After the divorce, I had convinced myself that moving back to Charleston would offer stability. Instead, it felt like walking straight into the same walls I had been running from. My parents treated me politely, but I could hear the judgment under their voices, the tone that said, I had failed. Melissa didn't need to speak it at all. Her neat suburban house, her husband's steady job, her 2 children dressed in matching sweaters did all the speaking for her. By comparison, I was the younger sister in a small apartment holding 2 kids close and trying to make ends meet. I kept my head down and worked, taking a job as a junior marketing assistant at a small firm downtown. The pay covered the bills, nothing more, but I picked up freelance projects at night, logos, websites, copywriting. Some nights I stayed up past midnight with tired eyes and coffee gone cold beside me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. If I couldn't rely on family to make room for me, then maybe I could build a life where my children would never question their place. Leah started noticing. One evening, she drew a picture of a house with a red door and 3 figures holding hands out front. She taped it to the refrigerator with uneven letters beneath "Home, Just Us." I looked at that drawing every morning as I poured cereal into bowls and tied shoelaces. It reminded me that the absence we felt at the family table didn't have to define us. I didn't want my children believing they were always guests in someone else's life. The invitations, or rather the lack of them, continued through that year. A cousin's engagement was celebrated at a restaurant across town. I saw it days later on social media, Melissa's caption beaming about family togetherness. There was no plate set aside for me, no phone call afterward. I didn't argue anymore, didn't beg for explanations. I noted it quietly, like adding another drop into a glass that was already full. What hurt more was the way my children were brushed aside. Leah once asked if she could give her grandmother a school drawing, and I watched Carol smile stiffly and place it on a stack she never looked at again. Benjamin carried a toy truck into the house on one of the rare afternoons we visited only for Melissa's children to push him out of the playroom. I tried not to let my face show the anger, but those small cuts added up. Through it all, the response from my family never changed. My mother, with that polite smile, repeating that I was always welcome. My father, mostly silent, never meeting my eyes for long. Melissa satisfied in her role as the daughter who did everything right. None of them seemed to notice the cracks forming in me, or maybe they simply didn't care to. That winter night, after returning from the porch yet again, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and scrolled through messages. Melissa had sent a text, "Hope you're not too upset. Mom was really overwhelmed this year. Maybe stop by tomorrow for leftovers." Leftovers. That was what we were worth. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat in the dim light and decided this couldn't continue. From that moment, I promised myself I would no longer pretend that exclusion was normal. I would not keep teaching my children to accept scraps of attention, to nod quietly while others decided when they mattered. If my family couldn't make room for us at their table, then I would create one of my own, with space wide enough for every person who chose to be present. But at the time, it was only a promise whispered to myself, fragile and untested. I had no idea how to bring it to life. All I knew was that something had to change, because another year like this would break me. And as I looked at Leah's drawing on the refrigerator, I felt the faintest spark of what might come next. The divorce had ended quietly, with no shouting or slamming doors, only the sound of papers sliding across a long wooden table. Jacob and I had been married for nearly a decade, but by the time it ended, we were strangers who barely spoke. He kept the house in Charlotte, and I packed the car with clothes, toys, and the last pieces of pride I had left. Returning to Charleston seemed like the safest choice. I told myself that being closer to my parents would mean stability for Leah and Benjamin. Instead, I found the same subtle judgments waiting wrapped in polite smiles that carried more weight than any open criticism. Carol welcomed us with a hug that lasted just long enough to appear warm, but not long enough to feel sincere. My father said little, only remarking that he hoped I had thought things through. Melissa didn't even need words. The way she looked at me with the faintest lift of her eyebrows said more than any speech could. She wore her life like an expensive coat, one that fit her perfectly, while mine was patched together from whatever scraps I could hold on to. The apartment I found wasn't much to look at. 2 bedrooms, old tile floors, and a faucet in the kitchen that squealed each time it was turned on. But it gave Leah and Benjamin their own space, and it gave me a chance to start again. I worked full-time at a small marketing firm downtown, and in the evenings I added freelance projects to my plate. The nights blurred together as I sat at the table sketching logos, building websites, and editing copy while the children slept in the next room. Some nights I worked until my eyes burned, but exhaustion felt easier to carry than failure. There were moments, though, when the weight of everything crept in. On birthdays or holidays, I would scroll through pictures Melissa posted, the whole family gathered around tables or smiling in front of decorated cakes. Leah sometimes saw them too and asked why we weren't there. I never had an answer that felt good enough. Each event we missed pressed deeper into me, carving out a quiet space filled with doubt. One evening, Leah wandered into the kitchen while I was working. She held up a drawing of a house with snow on the roof and a red door. 3 stick figures stood out front, holding hands, and beneath them she had written, "Home Just Us." She taped it to the refrigerator and smiled before running back to her room. I stood there for a long time staring at the paper, my throat tight. That picture said more than I could have put into words. It wasn't just about the apartment we lived in. It was about belonging, about a place where we didn't have to wait for permission to feel welcome. I began sketching my own drawings at night, small blueprints of the life I wanted. A home with space for the children to grow, a backyard for them to play in, and a dining room big enough for everyone who truly cared to sit around the table. I wasn't sure how I would reach it, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting for others to hand me scraps of inclusion. At work, I tried to push myself harder. One afternoon, I presented a campaign pitch that earned applause from a client, and afterward, my boss pulled me aside. "You've got real instincts," he said. It was the first time in years I had heard words of affirmation spoken directly to me without hesitation or comparison. 2 weeks later, I was promoted to senior associate, and with each new step I took, I felt a little closer to those sketches taped on the refrigerator door. The apartment still carried its flaws: the faucet that leaked steadily through the night, the cracked tile that never seemed to stay clean, the closet door that stuck no matter how many times I pulled. But little by little, I filled the space with signs of our own story. Leah's artwork hung on the walls, Benjamin's toy cars lined the hallway, and my desk was stacked with projects from clients who trusted me to deliver. Even with progress, the silence from my family remained. Invitations continued to pass me by. My mother's explanations never changed, always suggesting that I was welcome while never actually making room. Each time I smiled politely, but the truth settled deeper. My children and I weren't considered part of the core family anymore. I tried not to let it show, especially in front of Leah and Benjamin. At bedtime, I read them stories until they fell asleep, listening to their steady breathing and reminding myself that they deserved better than the uncertainty I had grown used to. They deserved a place where their presence wasn't conditional, where love wasn't rationed out in careful portions. The thought stayed with me into the late hours when the apartment grew still and the only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock. I would sit there with blueprints and notes spread across the table, telling myself that the life we wanted wasn't impossible. It was just out of reach, waiting for me to climb a little further. And yet in the quiet, the question lingered. How much longer could I keep building on my own, carrying the silence of family who had long since stopped making space for us? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I had to keep trying. Something had to shift, because I couldn't keep standing outside closed doors forever. Momentum began to build before I even realized it. By spring, my freelance calendar filled faster than I could manage. A small cafe asked me to design a new menu board and website. A yoga studio wanted a complete rebrand. A local law office needed someone to create steady content for their social media. I worked during Leah's nap times after Benjamin's bedtime, and in the early mornings before school drop-offs. It was exhausting, but each completed project felt like a step forward. At the marketing firm, my efforts didn't go unnoticed. After one meeting where I pitched a campaign that landed perfectly with the client, my boss pulled me aside in the hallway. "You've got instincts I can trust," he told me. His words echoed in my mind long after I'd left the office. 2 weeks later, I was promoted to senior associate, and 2 months after that, I stepped into the role of account manager. For the first time in years, I wasn't just keeping up. I was moving ahead. The more my career grew, the more I allowed myself to dream. One Thursday afternoon in early October, I drove past a house that stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't perfect. The paint on the siding had faded, the yard was overgrown with ivy, and the porch light hung at an odd angle. But there was something about the wide porch and bold red door that pulled me in. I slowed the car, scribbled down the number on the for sale sign, and that night I pulled up the listing. 4 bedrooms, original heart pine floors, a dining room with wooden paneling, and only 10 minutes from the kids' school. The price was daunting but not impossible. Without giving myself time to overthink, I scheduled a tour. The first time we stepped inside, Leah ran her hand along the banister like it was an instrument. "Mom," she whispered, "it smells like Christmas." Benjamin wandered into the dining room, twirling in the sunlight that poured through the windows. I stood in the entryway, my eyes closed for a moment, and I could see it all. Garlands on the mantel, laughter spilling from the kitchen, a table big enough for everyone who belonged. 3 weeks later, the house was ours. When I told my parents, Carol pressed her lips together and asked, "Isn't that a bit much? Natalie, given your situation?" My father's only reply was, "Well, I hope you've thought this through." Melissa sent a text that read, "4 bedrooms, that's ambitious. Hope you can keep up with it." I didn't answer any of them. I was too busy pulling up carpet, painting walls, and scrubbing away someone else's history to make space for our own. Leah chose lavender for her bedroom walls, carefully painting the edges with a small brush. Benjamin picked a bright green dinosaur theme, plastering stickers across his dresser drawers. I set up a home office for the first time in my life, sunlight streaming in through a window that overlooked the yard. In the evenings, I stood in the dining room running my hand along the surface of the second-hand table I had refinished myself. Whispering to the empty room, I said aloud, "This year we stay home." By November, the house no longer felt like someone else's past. It felt like ours. Leah's paintings hung on the refrigerator, Benjamin's toy trains lined the hallway, and my office desk overflowed with client folders. I had more responsibilities than ever, but I felt steady in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, while brushing Leah's hair before bed, she asked Mommy who's coming to Christmas this year. The question settled over me like a pause in a church service. For months, I had focused on surviving and building, not daring to think about December. but as soon as she asked, the vision came together. I didn't just want to host Christmas, I wanted to redefine it. The next morning I started a list, not of groceries or gifts, but of people. People who had shown up for me when my own family hadn't. Maya, my college roommate whose little boy once called me Aunt Nat. Mrs. Ellis, the neighbor who dropped off banana bread after every storm. Jonah and Eric, the couple across the street who hauled a couch inside for me when it wouldn't fit through the door. Claire Leah's art teacher who stayed late every Thursday just because Leah loved painting dragons. One by one, I wrote their names and the list grew. 10 people who had chosen us without question. That night, I sat at my desk and let the thought settle this Christmas would be different. The table was already built, the house already ready. For the first time in my adult life, I wouldn't wait for an invitation. I would send my own. The promise I had whispered the Christmas before now had shape. I didn't know yet how much it would stir or what storms it might bring, but I knew this much: we would not be standing outside closed doors again. The week before Thanksgiving, I noticed a shift in Melissa. She started calling more often, her voice coated with an almost apologetic tone I hadn't heard before. "Natalie," she said one afternoon, I just wanted to see how things are with the kids." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave us alone, that we were finally safe and happy, but something held me back. "We're doing well," I answered cautiously. "Leah started a new art program, and Benjamin loves the train set you sent." She chuckled softly and promised she'd visit soon. When she arrived, she brought a small basket of homemade treats. We ate in the kitchen while the children played in the living room, their laughter bouncing off the freshly painted walls. Melissa kept glancing at the pictures I had taken of the house and the kids' new rooms. Finally, she said, "Natalie, I know I wasn't always supportive. I shouldn't have doubted you." Her eyes looked genuine, but I stayed quiet, letting the moment stretch without a response. That evening, after the kids were tucked into bed, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, thinking about the last few months. Every long night, every extra shift, every moment of quiet fear had led to this, our own space, a home that belonged to us, and people slowly reconnecting. I realized something: my life was no longer being dictated by the mistakes or disbelief of others. I had built something new, something real. The days that followed were filled with small victories. I finally met with the bank to finalize the refinancing for the house, and they approved the application with terms I hadn't thought possible. My freelance contracts kept growing, and I began mentoring a young designer at one of the studios, someone who reminded me of myself a decade earlier, full of ideas, but unsure of where to channel them. The act of guiding someone else gave me a sense of balance I hadn't known I needed. The children thrived in their school routines. Leah came home one afternoon clutching a handmade card. "For Mommy and Daddy," she said. I asked who it was for, and she beamed, "For you and Mr. Blake." My heart skipped. I remembered that the school had paired her with Mr. Blake, the new music teacher, for a creative project. It was silly and sweet, but seeing her excitement made me feel like we were part of something larger than just surviving. Then came the first family gathering since we'd moved into our new home. I debated whether to invite Carol and Richard, uncertain if old tensions would surface, but decided to extend the invitation cautiously. "Natalie, you're sure about this?" Melissa asked. "They're not exactly warm." I nodded. "It's time," I said. "We've done the hard work. It's time they see who we've become." The evening arrived crisp and bright, the scent of roasting turkey filling the kitchen. Leah helped set the table, carefully folding napkins and arranging silverware. Benjamin, wearing a miniature apron, insisted on helping with the pie. When Carol and Richard arrived, there was a brief, awkward pause. Their eyes scanned the house as if seeing it for the first time, noting the warm lights, the clean floors, and the laughter spilling from the kitchen. Dinner was quiet at first, with tentative conversation. Carol commented on the decor, her voice less sharp than usual. Richard asked about my work, genuinely interested in the projects I had taken on. I realized I had expected their coldness, but instead, the atmosphere softened almost imperceptibly with each question, each acknowledgement. I watched Leah, who spoke freely about her art, her words bright and confident, and I understood how far we had come. Melissa's role that evening was subtle, supportive. She shared stories of her own work, complimented the children on their manners, and even laughed at one of my father's dry jokes. I noticed that for the first time, Melissa and I were allies in the space that had once been defined by judgment. It wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was a foundation. After dinner, while clearing the table, my father leaned close. "Natalie," he said quietly, "you've built a good life here. I see it now." His words were not apology, but they carried recognition, something I had waited years to hear. My mother nodded from the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes glistening. I kept my smile soft, letting their acknowledgement settle without rushing to accept it fully. That night I tucked the kids into bed and paused in Benjamin's doorway. He had fallen asleep, clutching the small dinosaur figurines he had insisted on bringing to the table that evening. I watched Leah adjust her blanket, murmuring about the songs she had sung with Mr. Blake at school. I realized that the most important part of the evening wasn't the tentative peace with my family, but the sense that we were finally living on our own terms, protected by our home and our choices. A week later, I received a message from Mr. Blake. He invited us to attend the school's holiday concert, suggesting a small celebration afterward for the families. Leah jumped with excitement, dragging Benjamin along. I agreed, grateful for the chance to experience a normal, happy occasion without fear or reservation. On the drive there, I caught myself smiling, noticing the way the sunlight caught Benjamin's hair and how Leah hummed the songs she had learned. I thought of the house we had built together, the life we had constructed from scratch, and I felt a quiet strength. The obstacles hadn't disappeared entirely, but we had learned to navigate them. That night, the concert ended with the children proudly taking bows, their faces glowing with accomplishment. Parents clapped friends, shared smiles, and for a moment, I let myself imagine a future where moments like this were ordinary, where recognition, warmth, and safety were constants, not exceptions. The drive home was calm, the streets quiet and lined with bare trees. I held the steering wheel a little tighter, thinking of the path that had brought us here. There would be challenges, still moments when old fears and family tensions would resurface, but I felt equipped finally to meet them without panic. This home, these children, this life, I would protect it. And in that protective clarity, I felt ready. Ready for the holidays, ready for growth, and quietly ready to face the family confrontations I had once feared. The winter ahead promised more than cold nights. It promised the chance to turn the warmth we had created into permanence. The idea came in early December one night after the kids had gone to sleep and I was washing dishes in the quiet. I had been thinking about our guest list. Maya, Mrs. Ellis, Jonah, and Eric Clare from the school, and I knew I wanted this Christmas to feel different. Not just a warm gathering, but something extraordinary, something that made it clear we weren't waiting on anyone's approval anymore. I remembered a dinner years ago where Melissa had gone on and on about a restaurant in town, Magnolia House. She'd gushed over the chef like he was royalty. Adrian Moss, she had said, isn't just a cook. He's an artist. She'd posted about it for weeks, pictures of truffle risotto and seared duck with cherry glaze. That name stuck in my mind. I looked him up on a whim, not expecting anything. His booking page was closed through the end of the year, with a note that December had been full since August. Still, I called the number listed for private events. The woman who answered sounded brisk, already prepared to say no. I took a breath and said, "I'm willing to triple his standard rate." She paused. "I'll check with the chef and call you back." An hour later, my phone lit up. "Miss Warren," the assistant said. Chef Moss would be honored to prepare Christmas dinner in your home. It all came together faster than I expected. We finalized a menu that still feels like a dream: herb-crusted lamb mushroom ravioli, spiced citrus chocolate soufflé, and sparkling cider for the kids served in real glassware. I ordered handwritten invitations with gold edging and had them delivered the week before Christmas. The top of each card read, "Join us for Christmas." At the bottom, seats have already been made. All you need to bring is your appetite and your heart. By the time Christmas morning arrived, the house was filled with the scent of rosemary and butter. Leah helped me tie ribbons on the napkins while Benjamin counted the plates, whispering the numbers under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 10. He grinned and held up both hands in excitement. The first knock came just after 2. Maya stepped in carrying wine, and her daughter's laughter. Mrs. Ellis followed with a tin of cookies wrapped in red ribbon. Jonah and Eric brought a wreath they had made themselves, woven with evergreen and cinnamon sticks. Claire handed Leah a small envelope of watercolor cards painted by her students. One of them showed our house, complete with its red door. Chef Moss and his team worked seamlessly in the kitchen. He greeted the children warmly, crouching down to show Benjamin how to balance a plate without tipping it. Leah hovered near the counter, watching every detail with wide eyes. We toasted with cider and champagne. The food arrived in quiet waves, each dish presented with care, each flavor better than the last. The table glowed under candlelight. At one point, I stepped back just to take it in. There were no strained smiles, no whispered judgments. Just voices layered in laughter, the clink of glasses and the soft shuffle of Benjamin's feet as he danced with Leah between courses. After dessert, we moved to the living room. Claire brought out a stack of board games, and the kids begged for Candyland first. Benjamin crawled onto Mrs. Ellis's lap and promptly fell asleep. Jonah played soft piano in the corner, and the others talked and passed around cookies. I picked up my phone, hesitated, and then took 3 photos. One of the table still glowing with warmth and candlelight. One of Leah and Benjamin in the kitchen with Chef Moss in the background. And one group photo, everyone smiling, glasses raised. I posted them with 3 captions. Grateful for friends who feel like family. When Christmas feels like coming home. December 25th. Surrounded by love. The likes came quickly along with a steady stream of comments. This is beautiful, Natalie. You deserve this. Wait, is that the Adrian Moss? I smiled until the screen lit up again. A call from Melissa. Then another from my mother. Then my father. I didn't answer, but the text followed. Melissa wrote, "Was that really Chef Moss? How did you even book him? Why didn't you invite us? I read it twice." Then again. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I didn't respond, because the answer was already clear. Every year they told me there wasn't enough room. Now I had made a room of my own, and this time there really wasn't space for anyone who only showed up when it was convenient. Not yet, anyway. 3 days after Christmas, I heard the tires first slow over the gravel, then the engine cutting off. The knock on the front door was quick, sharp. I opened it to find Melissa standing there in her tan wool coat, a gift bag dangling from one hand, her eyes tight and unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside before I could answer. The warmth of the house met her like a wall. She paused in the entryway, eyes scanning the garland-wrapped staircase, the dried wine glasses still by the sink, and the framed group photo from Christmas on the hallway table. Her gaze lingered there longer than she meant it to. "Nice place," she said, her voice light but edged. "Didn't realize you were doing this well." "Thanks," I replied, closing the door behind her. Leah and Benjamin were upstairs playing. I didn't want them caught in this. "You can sit," I offered, nodding toward the living room, but she stayed standing, so she began folding her arms. You really hired Chef Moss? The actual one I did. I've tried for years to get him for Mom's birthday. He won't even return our calls. I shrugged. Apparently he doesn't work with rude clients. Her lips thinned. You're always so dramatic, she snapped, posting all those photos like some kind of statement. I raised an eyebrow. Was it a statement? Or just a dinner? I wasn't excluded from. Melissa's eyes narrowed. You're mad about one Christmas. I stepped closer. Melissa, when was the last time I was invited to anything where I wasn't an afterthought? When was the last time someone in this family made room without me having to ask? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I waited. Nothing. I just think she started again recovering that the way you're acting this chosen family thing, it feels like you're trying to make a point. Like revenge. I held her gaze. It's not revenge. It's healing. She scoffed, but I didn't stop. You spent years making me feel like I didn't belong. Like my kids were too much. Like we needed to earn a seat at the table we grew up around. Whether you meant to or not, it happened. Melissa looked down at her shoes. Mom's been crying for days, she said quietly. She's humiliated. People at church saw the photos and asked why you weren't there. She can tell them the truth, I said, that there wasn't room. She regrets that. I nodded. Does she regret it because she hurt us or because someone else noticed Melissa swallowed? I know we haven't been fair to you, she said softer now, but this felt like a slap. I didn't flinch. Good. Then maybe now you understand how it feels. Her mouth trembled, and for a moment I saw the version of my sister I'd once admired before the divide grew too wide. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. You already did, I said. When you decided your comfort mattered more than my presence. When you told me to come by for leftovers. When you smiled like it was normal to leave me and my children standing in the cold. She stepped back, slightly stunned by the honesty. After a long pause, she sank onto the couch. What do you want? I crossed to the mantel and picked up one of Claire's watercolor cards. The one with our house painted carefully in soft grays and red. I want respect, I said. Not guilt, not pity, just basic respect as a daughter, a sister, and a mother. Melissa nodded slowly. And if we changed, could we still be family? If you want to be part of this life, I said you'll need to show up for it. Not with appearances, but with honesty, with something real. The silence between us stretched long and thick and necessary. Then I'll try, she said. Good, I replied, because this time I'm not making space for anyone who doesn't show up with their whole heart. Later that night after Melissa left, I didn't cry. I thought I might, but the tears never came. Instead, I sat on the couch and watched the last of the fire burn low. Leah came down in her fuzzy socks blanket in hand. Why did Aunt Melissa come? She asked, curling up beside me. She wanted to talk. Is she mad? No, baby, I said. She's learning. Learning what I looked at her, that soft face full of trust. Learning how to love better. Leah blinked, then rested her head on my arm. I like our kind of love better, she whispered. And just like that, all of it softened. A few days after Melissa left, I started noticing the smaller things, the ones that tell you something is truly changing. Not in them necessarily, but in us. Leah began setting the table without being asked, folding napkins with care, placing forks just so. Benjamin drew a picture of our house this time, with smiling stick figures labeled Me, Mommy, and Chef Moss. He even gave him a cape. Mrs. Ellis started stopping by on Thursday afternoons for tea. Jonah and Eric helped me hang light fixtures in the hallway, and Claire invited Leah to a weekend watercolor class she taught out of her garage. None of it was big or loud, but all of it felt real. One night while tucking Leah into bed, she looked up at me and asked, "Is it okay to say no to people if they make you feel small?" I paused, then nodded. "It's more than okay," I told her. "It's necessary." She grinned and said, "Good. I don't want to invite the cousins to my birthday party. They're always mean." I blinked, then smiled. "It's your party, sweetheart. You get to choose." And in that quiet moment, I realized something. I wasn't just healing the part of me that had long settled for scraps. I was raising 2 children who were learning they didn't have to. 2 weeks later, I got a message from my mother. "Your father and I would like to see the children. Maybe we could do something for your birthday." I read it twice and set the phone down. There was no mention of Christmas, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a polite request to see my children without me. That said everything I needed to know. That weekend, as Leah decorated her birthday invitations with stickers and glitter, she asked, "Do I have to invite people I don't feel safe with?" I knelt beside her, looked her in the eyes, and said, "No, baby, you never do, and neither do I." That night, I finally replied to my mother, "The kids are doing well, their schedule is full, and so is our life. If you want to reconnect, it will have to begin with honesty and respect. I'm no longer entertaining anything less." She hasn't responded. But this silence feels lighter. It's no longer something I carry, it's something I've set down. What I've learned is this love that needs to be earned in silence isn't love. Family that turns away when you're at the door isn't family. The people who text to check in, the ones who remember your birthday, who bring soup when your kids are sick, who stay after dinner to wash the dishes, those are the people who matter. Last week, Chef Moss called to confirm Christmas again. Same date, same menu. But this year, he added maple glazed carrots for Leah and s'mores for Benjamin. The guest list is a little longer now. A few new names, a few familiar ones, all chosen, all welcome. This house, this table, this life, it's full, not perfect, not polished, but full of warmth of effort of people who show up without needing to be asked. If Melissa ever decides to come not for appearances, but with sincerity, I'll open the door, I won't beg. And if my parents ever want a relationship, they'll have to meet me here, not where it's easy for them, because we don't stand outside anymore. We own the porch now, and this Christmas, like everyone after it, there will be 12 chairs, every seat filled, no explanations, no apologies, just a red door that only opens for love that knocks with grace. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who's still waiting outside, and if you've found your own table, go ahead and leave a light on. Someone might need to see it.